June 1944, a captured airfield somewhere. In Germany, Walter, holder of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, a man with 100 aerial victories to his name, felt his pulse quicken as he approached the silver-skinned aircraft sitting on the tarmac, the North American P-51 Mustang, the American fighter that had begun appearing over the Reich in ever-growing numbers. The airplane that was killing his comrades at an alarming rate had been summoned here by the high command. They wanted answers. What made this American machine so deadly? What were its weaknesses? How could their pilots survive against it? What would discover in the next few hours would change how German pilots approached the P-51 forever. But what shocked his superiors wasn't his praise for the aircraft, it was something far more troubling, something that revealed just how far behind they had fallen in the war for aerial supremacy. Walter was no ordinary pilot. Born in May 1923 in the small Bavarian town, he had joined the in February 1943 and been assigned to one of the most elite fighter units in the German Air Force, Jag 52. This was the wing that produced more aces than any other in aviation history. The wing where would claim 352 victories, where would claim 301, where Gunter would claim 275, and Walter belonged among them. By the time he climbed into that captured P-51, had already proven himself as one of the most accurate fighter pilots in the historical analysis of Soviet loss. Records would later confirm that his victory claims matched enemy losses with remarkable precision. Of his 137 aerial victories, 119 were against fighters, not bombers. This wasn't a pilot who ambushed formations of lumbering aircraft. This was a dog fighter, a killer. He had experienced war at its most intense on May 30th, 1944, just weeks before this evaluation flight had claimed 11 aerial victories in a single day over the oil fields. 11 aircraft destroyed. He became what they called a double ace in a day. Then on July 16th he did it again, claiming 10 aircraft shot down near northeast of he flew the Bf-109G. He knew every quirk of that aircraft, every strength, every weakness. He had been shot down 3 times, wounded 4 times. He had made 12 emergency landings. He had even sunk a Soviet gunboat. He understood aerial combat at a level that few men on Earth ever would, and this was the expert that chose to evaluate their greatest fear. The captured P-51 Mustang sitting before was part of a remarkable intelligence operation. Throughout the war they had been systematically recovering crashed in Allied aircraft from German-controlled territory. These machines were repaired, repainted with German markings, and flown by a specialized unit that came to be known as the Circuit, formed in 1943 under the command of. This unit was officially designated to staff for Deer, the 2nd Squadron of the Experimental Unit of the High Command. Their mission was twofold. First, evaluate captured Allied aircraft to discover their strengths and vulnerabilities. Second, tour operational airfields demonstrating these enemy aircraft to pilots and teaching them techniques to counter these machines in combat. Flew everything the Allies threw at Germany: P-38 Lightnings, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, Supermarine Spitfires, Mosquitoes, Hawker Typhoons, and of course the North American P-51 Mustang. Several P-51s had been captured. Following crash landings, these were meticulously restored to flying condition using parts salvaged from other wrecks. The aircraft were repainted with German markings and bright yellow undersides, tails, and nose sections. This distinctive paint scheme ensured that German anti-aircraft crews wouldn't open fire on what appeared to be an enemy fighter flying over the Reich. Each captured Mustang received a cannon code beginning with T9, the P-51B coded T9 plus HK, the P-51C coded T9 plus CK. These aircraft toured from airfield to airfield from to Hanover WTO from gutting into, and elite pilots like Walter were given the opportunity to fly them. Now climbed into the cockpit of the captured P-51, his first impression hit him immediately. The cockpit was enormous after thousands of hours. The snug confines of the Bf-109, the Mustang's cockpit felt like a different world in the 109's shoulders. Pressed against the sides the cannon. Between his legs the controls within. Easy reach, everything tight, everything close, everything responsive. In the P-51 everything felt out of reach and too far away from the pilot. This wasn't necessarily a criticism, it was disorientation. A pilot who had trained his reflexes in one environment suddenly found himself in another. Entirely the muscle memory that kept you alive in combat, that allowed you to react faster than conscious thought, was suddenly useless. Would later describe this sensation explicitly. During the war I had the opportunity to fly captured P-47s and P-51s. I didn't like the Thunderbolt, it was too big. The cockpit was immense and unfamiliar. After so many hours in the snug confines of the 109, everything felt out of reach and too far away from the pilot. But then he added something crucial. Although the P-51 was a fine airplane to fly because of its reactions and capabilities, it too was disconcerting. Here was a man with a 100 victories, acknowledging that the P-51 was a fine airplane. He didn't dismiss it, he didn't underestimate it, he recognized its quality while explaining why German pilots found it alien compared to their own machines. This psychological dimension was critical intelligence for the German pilots transitioning between aircraft experienced the same disorientation in reverse when they encountered P-51s in combat. They needed to understand that the American pilots had tremendous situational awareness. From that spacious bubble canopy, that they had room to move and adjust, that they weren't cramped into a claustrophobic metal coffin. But the cockpit was only the beginning of what discovered when pushed the throttle forward and the built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine roared to life. He felt something that changed his understanding of what aircraft could do. The Merlin V1650 was a masterpiece of engineering, a liquid-cooled V12 producing 1,590 horsepower at combat ratings. It featured a two-speed, two-stage supercharger that maintained power at altitudes where the Bf-19's Benz DB6005 engine began to struggle. The supercharger engaged automatically, responding to changes in altitude without any input from the pilot. Fuel mixture adjusted itself. Aircraft simply produced power on demand. Regardless of how high you flew, P-51D could reach a top speed of 437. It had a service ceiling approaching 42,000, and its rate of climb, while not matching the Bf-109, was more than adequate for the tactical requirements of escort fighting. But noticed something else, something mechanical, something that spoke to the fundamental differences between American and German industrial capacity. There were no oil leaks. This might seem trivial, but for a man who had fought through Russian winters, where temperatures dropped to 40 below zero, where mechanics struggled to start engines using hand cranks in the freezing darkness, where oil leaks could mean the difference between returning home and dying in a forced landing behind enemy lines, the reliability of the Merlin engine was revolutionary. Another German ace, Günther R. flew these same captured aircraft and made the same observation. In interviews after the war, R. recalled his impressions of the P-51. I had a very good impression of the P-51 Mustang, where the big difference was the engine. When we received these aircraft, we flew about 300 hours in them. In the P-51, there was no oil leak, and that was just fantastic. This wasn't just reliability, this was industrial superiority. While German ground crews struggled to keep their Bf 109s flying with diminishing resources, and worn-out parts. American factories were producing Mustangs at a rate of more than 100 per week, each one precisely machined, each one virtually identical, each one ready to fly thousands of miles into the heart of the Reich. Continued. I was also very interested in the electrical starting switches, which we did not have. This made it very difficult in starting our engines. In the Russian winter we had the inertia starter. The inertia starter German ground crews had to physically crank a flywheel to build up enough rotational energy to turn over the engine. It was exhausting work, especially in brutal cold. Meanwhile, American pilots simply pressed a button. These weren't combat capabilities, they were logistical advantages. And in a war of attrition, logistics determined everything. As climbed and maneuvered through the German sky, he began to understand the P-51's secret weapon. It wasn't just the engine, it wasn't just the comfortable cockpit, it was the wing. The North American engineering team, led by chief designer Edgar, had done something revolutionary. They had designed the P-51 with a flow wing developed in cooperation with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. The NK-45100 airfoil was shaped to maintain smooth, orderly airflow over a much greater portion of the wing surface. Before that airflow turned turbulent. In theory, this could reduce wing drag by an astonishing 25 to 50% compared to conventional airfoils. In practice, the results were more modest. Manufacturing imperfections, battle damage, dirt, rain, and even insect debris could disrupt the flow, but even without achieving full theoretical performance, the Mustang's wing gave it advantages that could feel immediately. The aircraft was slippery. It cut through the air with a smoothness that the Bf-109 couldn't match at high speeds, particularly above 320. The P-51 was in its element. The controls remained responsive. The aircraft felt stable and confident, but the flow airfoil had another advantage that wouldn't be fully understood for years. By complete serendipity, the shaping of a flow wing was also excellent for reducing drag at high Mach numbers. The P-51 had what engineers would later call a superior transonic wing. Its critical Mach number, the speed at which compressibility effects began to cause dangerous handling problems, was higher than any German fighter. The P-51's tactical Mach number was 0.78. The Bf-109 and FW-190 both had tactical Mach numbers of only 0.75. The P-47 Thunderbolt was even worse at 0.71, and the P-38 Lightning at 0.68. What did this mean in combat? It meant that in a high-speed dive, when both aircraft were pushing toward the sound barrier, the P-51 pilot could maintain control while his opponent began to experience buffeting, loss of elevator effectiveness, and potentially fatal structural loads at the high altitudes where escort fighters operated, typically 25,000 to 30,000. This was an enormous advantage. Also tested the P-51's turn performance. Here the Bf-109 held its own. Both aircraft could outturn each other under the right circumstances. The 109 was better in low-speed turns, its slats deploying automatically to maintain lift as the aircraft approached stall. The P-51 was better in high-speed turns, its heavier construction and responsive controls maintaining energy through extended maneuvering. The third highest scoring German ace on the Western Front with 112 victories later summarized the comparison. We would outturn the P-51 and the other American fighters with the Bf-109 or the FW-190. Their turn rate was about the same. P-51 was faster than us, but our munitions and cannon were better. This was accurate as far as it went, but it missed the critical point. The Bf-109 might turn better at low speed. It might have more powerful armament with its 20 cannon and 13 machine guns. But none of that mattered if the P-51 could simply refuse to engage in a turning fight. The American pilots understood their aircraft. They knew to keep their speed up, to dive and zoom, to use their superior performance above 25,000. They knew that time was on their side. The P-51 carried enough fuel to fight for hours. The Bf-109 had perhaps 90 minutes of combat endurance. And that endurance was the P-51's ultimate weapon. What reported to his superiors wasn't just technical data, it was strategic intelligence of the most disturbing kind. The P-51 Mustang, with its combination of performance and range, could do something no Allied fighter had ever done before. It could escort bombers all the way to Berlin, all the way to the heart of the Reich, all the way to targets that they had believed were beyond the reach of American fighters. This transformed the entire strategic equation of the air war. When the 8th Air Force's heavy bombers had flown unescorted, they had suffered catastrophic losses. On August 17, 1943, a raid on the victories had cost 60 bombers, 600 air crew killed or captured. On October 14, 1943, another raid lost another 60 bombers. The Americans called it Black Thursday. The P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings that escorted the bombers could only reach the German border before their fuel forced them to turn back. They simply waited. They positioned their fighters beyond the range of American escorts and tore into the bomber formations with impunity. The P-51 changed everything. With 108 external drop tanks, a P-51D could fly 1,650 m. That was enough to accompany bombers from England to targets in western Poland and back. That was enough to reach any city, any factory, any airfield in Germany. On March 4, 1944, P-51 BS of the 4th Fighter Group escorted bombers all the way to Berlin for the first time. It was a journey of 1,100 miles round trip. Colonel's pilot arrived over the German capital with fuel to spare. That was stunned. Marshal Hermann Göring, commander of the German Air Force, reportedly declared, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." This was the intelligence that brought back from his evaluation flights. The P-51 wasn't just another enemy fighter, it was a war-winning weapon. It was the aircraft that would destroy the by forcing German pilots to engage in a battle of attrition they could not win. When the report reached high command, the implications were clear. German fighter pilots could no longer simply wait for the American escorts to turn back. The escorts weren't turning back, they were coming all the way to the target and all the way home again. What could they do? The tactical recommendations were straightforward. Avoid prolonged engagements with P-51s. When possible, attack quickly and disengage. Use the Bf-109's superior climb rate to escape by going vertical. If you couldn't escape, force the fight to low altitude and low speed where German aircraft had relative advantages. But these were tactical solutions to a strategic problem. The real issue wasn't that the P-51 was impossible to defeat. In single combat, German aces shot down Mustangs regularly. Walter claimed at least one P-51 among his 258 victories. Shot down 28 Mustangs to become the war's top Mustang killer. The real issue was mathematics. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force was sending hundreds of P-51s over Germany on every major mission. On March 6, 1944, more than 900 fighters accompanied over 800 bombers to Berlin. The Germans called it Black Monday for the bomber losses they inflicted, but they were also losing irreplaceable pilots at a terrifying rate. The P-51 pilots had been given new orders by Major General James, the new commander of the 8th Air Force. Instead of flying close escort, they were released to hunt the wherever they could find it. They swept ahead of the bomber formations, catching German fighters as they climbed to intercept They strafed airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground. They pursued damaged German fighters until they crashed or the pilots bailed out. This was a war of attrition designed to destroy the experienced pilots, and it was working during Big Week. Massive bombing offensive in February 1944 that targeted German aircraft production facilities. Mustang pilots destroyed 17% of the experienced fighter pilots in air to combat in a single week. These pilots couldn't be replaced. Germany was producing more aircraft than ever, but the pilots to fly them were dying faster than new ones could be trained. By 1944, the average German fighter pilot entering combat had perhaps 100 hours of flight time. His American opponent had 400 hours or more. This disparity showed in the statistics as 1944 progressed. P-51 kills against German fighters rose. While P-51 losses fell, the kill ratio became increasingly lopsided. German aces with hundreds of victories found themselves commanding squadrons of terrified who lasted days instead of months. Himself would survive the war, but barely. On July 16, 1944, the same day he claimed 10 victories in a single day, he was severely wounded. He spent months when he returned to combat in February 1945, taking command of one staff of JG-52. The he rejoined was a shadow of its former self when the war ended on May 8, 1945's unit was at airfield in Czechoslovakia. They surrendered to the Americans after 3 weeks in an American prison camp. The entire JAG-52 was handed over to the Soviet Union, was released quickly because of the severity of his injuries, but many of his comrades would not return from Soviet captivity for 10 years. Gunter, who also flew captured P-51s, provided additional perspective on what the aircraft meant for German pilots in interviews conducted decades after the war. He was remarkably candid about the Mustang's superiority. You could not fly the Bf-109 for 7 hours. The cockpit was too tight, too narrow. The P-51 cockpit was for me a great room, just fantastic. Coming from a man with 275 aerial victories, this was an extraordinary admission. Wasn't claiming the P-51 was more maneuverable or had better firepower. He was acknowledging something more fundamental. The P-51 was designed for the kind of war America was fighting: long-range offensive operations deep into enemy territory. The Bf-109 was designed for quick scrambles, short engagements, rapid turnarounds. It was a point defense interceptor. It was brilliant at what it was designed to do, but by 1944 the war demanded something else. Continued. I think the best airplane was the P-51. Certainly the Spitfire was excellent, but it didn't have the endurance of the P-51. I think this was the decisive factor. They flew for 7 hours and we flew for 1 hour and 20 minutes. That makes quite a difference in aerial combat. 1 hour and 20 minutes against 7 hours. This was the mathematical reality that no amount of pilot skill could overcome. Before we continue with the final phase of this story, I want to thank you for taking the time to explore this crucial turning point in the air war over Europe. If you're finding this account valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us tell more of these remarkable stories about the men and machines that decided history. There's another dimension to this evaluation that his superiors found deeply troubling. The P-51 wasn't just superior in specific metrics. It represented a fundamentally different approach to aircraft design. German aircraft were often described as precision instruments designed by engineers who prioritized performance above all else. The Bf-109 was small, light, and incredibly fast for its size, but it was also cramped, difficult to manufacture, and hard to maintain. The P-51 was designed for profitable mass production and operational effectiveness from the beginning. Its wing, despite being aerodynamically Revolutionary was also among the simplest to manufacture. It had a trapezoidal platform with straight, leading and trailing edges. This not only reduced production costs but also improved manufacturing accuracy, which helped achieve the aerodynamic efficiency the design demanded. The entire airframe was divided into 5 main sections: forward fuselage, center fuselage, rear fuselage, and 2 wing halves. Each section was fitted with wiring and piping before being joined. This modular approach meant damaged aircraft could be repaired quickly by swapping entire sections rather than laboriously fixing individual components. North American aviation built more than 15,500 Mustangs during the war. More P-51 alone, over 8,300, were produced than all variants of many other fighters combined. American factories were turning out aircraft at rates that German industry, increasingly hammered by strategic bombing, simply couldn't match. This was the broader lesson that's evaluation revealed. The P-51 wasn't just a better fighter, it was a symbol of industrial capacity that the Third Reich could never hope to equal. What happened to the men who tested these captured aircraft? Walter survived the war with 137 aerial victories, 119 of them against fighters. He was the 74th pilot to achieve 100 victories. He had been wounded 4 times, made 12 emergency landings, and received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on July 27, 1944. After the war, couldn't stay away from the sky. He became an aerobatics pilot, competing at the highest levels of the sport. In 1962, he won the German National Aerobatics Championship. He took second place in 1961, 1963, 1964, and 1966. He died on August 26, 2010, at the age of 87 in Germany. Günther became one of the most important military aviation figures of the post-war era. He joined the new West German in 1956 and eventually rose to the rank of lieutenant general, serving as commander of the German Air Force from 1971 to 1974. He died on October 4, 2009 at the age of 91. Both men lived long enough to reflect on what they had experienced. Both were candid about the capabilities of their opponent's aircraft. Both acknowledged that by 1944 there was fighting a losing battle against overwhelming material superiority. The P-51 Mustang went on to become arguably the most celebrated fighter aircraft of the Second World War. During the conflict, Mustang pilots claimed 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed. Aircraft served not only with the USAAF, but also with the RAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and numerous other allied nations. After the war, the Mustang continued to serve. It flew combat missions in Korea, where F-51s provided close air support alongside the new jets. It served with air forces around the world, remaining in military service with some nations into the 1980s. Today, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs still fly, their treasured warbirds lovingly maintained by pilots who understand that they're flying a piece of history. The sound of that Merlin engine, that distinctive roar that Hermann Göring heard over Berlin in March 1944, still echoes across airfields from Oshkosh to in archives around the world. The reports of pilots like Walter survived technical evaluations that captured a moment when German fighter pilots first confronted the aircraft that would help destroy their Air Force. Honest assessments from men who knew that admiration for an enemy's machine was a form of professional respect found the P-51's cockpit disconcerting. After the snug confines of his Bf-109, he thought the controls felt out of reach, too far away, but he also acknowledged that it was a fine airplane to fly because of its reactions and capabilities. A fine airplane coming from a man who had shot down 137 aircraft, who had Survived 4 wounds and 12 emergency landings, who had seen the best and worst that aerial combat could offer. This understated praise was perhaps the most damning verdict of all. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just a fine airplane, it was the airplane that changed the war. If you found this story valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us tell more of these remarkable historical accounts. Thank you for